In this video, I'm going to cover 5 points which are to do with dealing with stress effectively and productivity. Being more productive and less stressed is the essence of what they're about. And you may already have some great strategies in place, which is fantastic. So when you listen to these 5 strategies, you may already be using some of or part of them, which is great. But hopefully they'll give you some ideas of what you can do to be less stressed and more productive in your work. First of all, let's talk about stress. We really need to understand what stress is before we talk about the strategies to deal with it. And there's a lot of misunderstandings around the word stress, because not all stress is bad stress. In fact, there is a word called Eustress, which stands for healthy stress, and there are other terms such as distress or excess stress that obviously refer to stress that is not empowering. So a little metaphor that I've used before for many people is the chap going to the gym who decides he wants to get strong, and first time in the gym, and he sees this 200-pound bar and he wants to try and do a bench press, and he's really straining, and if he does manage to do one, he's probably going to damage himself. It's really difficult. So what he does instead of distressing himself and causing injury, he takes a 100-pound bar, which he can quite easily manage to push, and he does however many reps till he starts to feel his muscles tiring, and actually he's damaging his muscle fibers. That's, but not too much. So there's stress on his muscles. He then leaves the gym, he rests, he has the right nutrition, he relaxes, and then the next day or the day after he comes back and he does his workout again. And this time he adds an extra couple of pounds or an extra kilogram to the bar. So it's creating just a tiny bit more stress, but his muscles have recovered and grown. And he keeps repeating this every few days, and he adds a couple of pounds extra or another kilo extra every couple of days. And a few months later, he's actually worked his way up to 220 pounds, and he's managing to push this bar. And the original 200-pound bar, which he could barely move, is now relatively easy to move. And if we think of this as a metaphor in business, we can adapt ourselves to deal with more work more effectively by taking the right approach, by taking breaks, by rejuvenating properly. So these gaps in between when we're not working are really, really important. So that brings me on to the number one strategy, and there are many, but the number one strategy for what I call rejuvenating from stress, so that you keep the stress to healthy levels, and that is simply breathing. Some people call it mindfulness, but there are other ways you can relax or disengage through activities such as sport. You can go running, cycling, climbing. There's all kinds of activities. Going for nice long walks works for a lot of people, but also mindfully breathing. Some people call it meditation. It doesn't really matter what label you give it, but when you relax, take a breath in, and you just let go. You let go, and you get to a point where your mind switches off and you just focus on your breathing. That's the essence of it. There's some great apps you can get for breathing and mindfulness and meditation. And so I recommend you do something along those lines. And what I do is I try and do, most of the time when I have a moment, I focus on my breathing. So if I'm in between appointments, I'm transitioning between work and not working, I just take a few moments to breathe and disconnect from whatever I was doing and transition into the next activity. So this is a fantastic strategy for reducing and dealing with excess stress. Now let's go on to number 2. Number 2 is about planning strategies. So what happens when you start to plan more effectively? Yes, you become more productive and your stress levels will reduce. There's a great quote which says, "Failing to plan is planning to fail." So there are many ways in which we can plan, and when we're working with a team, we want to plan in a very communicative way. But the first thing is mapping out our priorities at the beginning of the day is a pretty fundamental way to go. Understanding what our priorities are is another thing we'll come on to, but really knowing what you've got to do for the day, what time blocks are actually committed to, scheduled in, and the time blocks in between, what are the important things for you to do there. And that moves us on to number 3, which is prioritizing. Having a prioritizing strategy. When you do this and you start to prioritize more effectively, yet again, you will become more productive and less stressed. So one of the most popular tools that a lot of my clients have been using for many years is called the urgent important grid. And this particular grid came from the US president from many years ago, Dwight Eisenhower, and he shared it with the world, and Stephen Covey then talked about it and got it to be very well known tool when he published his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So if we get the urgent important grid up here, we will see that we have things that are in one of 4 zones. Urgent important, zone 1. Important not urgent, zone 2. Not important urgent, zone 3. And not important not urgent, zone 4. And if we look at how we spend our day and we look at our activities, we can make an assessment of what percentage of our time we spend in each of these grids. And here's an interesting one which I call Mr. Average, because it was based on a number of my clients when I first started working with them. And as you can see, there's a very low score in zone 2. This is what Stephen Covey calls the magic zone, because obviously the more things that we can do that are important but not urgent, the more productive we're going to be in the long run. If we're just firefighting all the time, we're in zone 1. We're doing things that are important and urgent, and so we're not able to put things in place to deal with those fires in the future, or stop them from happening, I should say. So this is a really key grid to look at and to think to yourself, well, what am I doing today? And the things that I'm prioritizing, where do they fit? And if you're only doing things or predominantly doing things in zone 1, you're going to be stuck in a spiral. You need to be spending some of your time in zone 2. Zone 2 time is reflection time. It's like listening to this video now and thinking about your approach to work. That's zone 2. And it's through doing things like that you can become better at what you do. You can become more efficient. And it's a brilliant tool for reflecting on that. And the other thing to add to the back of this is what we call the 80-20 rule, which is, it's in nature, it's in finance, it's in many areas of life where we get 80% of the results through 20% of the effort. So picking that top 20% is really key. So if you had 10 things to do, if we say they're all important, or they're urgent and important, if you carefully select what are the most important 2, you'll get 80% of your results on average. So yeah, please use the urgent important grid and apply the 80-20 rule, and that will help you tremendously. Execution strategy. When you start to take action more efficiently and effectively, what will happen? Well, yes, you'll become more productive and your stress levels will reduce. And I would add to this that you'll get a real sense of achievement and fulfillment when you're able to effectively get stuff done. So first of all, what are bouncing balls? And secondly, we want a strategy to deal with them. So a bouncing ball, as you can see from this picture, can be quite overwhelming. It's a thought. It's any kind of thought around an action you think you may or should take, or something you're not sure whether you need to do, or something you know you need to do and you're not sure how to prioritize it. And we get many things, and it might be yes, I'll do that later, yes, I'll do that later. That's a bouncing ball. Anytime you say to yourself, oh, I'll do that later, it's a bouncing ball. So how do we stop it bouncing? Well, we've got to capture it on a piece of paper. So the first thing we want to do strategically is to do a brain dump. It's a great exercise to do right now. Just dump everything that's bouncing around in your head. It doesn't matter whether it's personal or work related. A bouncing ball is a bouncing ball, and what it does is it stifles your mind. It stifles your creative thinking. It creates brain fog, and it creates stress. So as soon as we get them onto a piece of paper, we can start to make more sense of them. So that's the first thing. I encourage everyone to do some kind of a brain dump, just to get everything down, no matter what it is. A relative you've got to ring, a business document you've got to complete, whatever it is, just write it down. And sometimes it's good to put a little time estimate next to it of how long if you are going to do it, how long you think it will take. Now we need an ongoing strategy to deal with stuff. We need a day-to-day strategy, so that when these thoughts, these bouncing balls, get shot across your bowels, you have a way of dealing with them. And the strategy that I like to use, and is really popular with a lot of my clients, is called the 5 Ds. And the 5 Ds stand for, number 1, do it. So my rule for this is, if I can do it in 2 minutes, I do it straight away. So if someone sent me an email or a message or a voicemail, and whatever they're asking or requesting, I can deal with it within 2 minutes. If I've got time to read it, then I should have time to do it in 2 minutes. So that's when I just respond straight away. If somebody's asking me, are you available next Wednesday at 3 o'clock? I have a quick look in my diary, yes I am, and I can send them the message. That way I don't get as many bouncing balls piling up, because I'm dealing with those things straight away. The next, number 2 D, is delegate it. So sometimes, again, the 2-minute rule applies. If I can delegate it within 2 minutes, I will. And that means I'm not doing it. But the third D, which then comes into play, is diary it. So if I can't do it straight away, or I can't delegate it because it's going to take more than 2 minutes for me to delegate, I put a note immediately in my diary saying, tell John to do X. Okay, and I'll have that in my diary for, say, 5 o'clock this afternoon, when I know I've got half an hour to spare to do it. Following on from these 3 Ds is dump it and delete it. And the only difference between those is when you dump something, it's something that's where you've got to communicate with somebody to say, thanks for asking me, but I can't do this, or you're having to communicate with somebody to put it to an end. Delete it is something, it might be an idea that you're playing around with, and we're going to move on to ideas in a second, or it might be you've signed up to some mailing list and you're not interested in being on it any longer, so you just unsubscribe. So and then finally we have an I, which if whatever you're doing doesn't fit into any of these Ds, the I stands for ideas. Some people say imagination as well, but anything that you're kind of cooking up in your imagination, you think, oh, it might be a great idea to do this, but you're not sure where it's going to go. And it's just, so I have a little creative book where I put my innovative, creative ideas that I'm not sure what I'm going to do with them yet. But they're still bouncing around in my head, so I put them there to acknowledge them, and I review that periodically. So having an ideas folder is something that I would recommend that for everybody. Okay, so that's the 5 Ds: do it, delegate it, diary it, dump it, delete it, and there's an ideas folder for anything that doesn't fit into those. So the 5th strategy I'd like to share with you is a communication strategy. And there are many communication strategies. Communication is a very vast and complex area, but we can simplify some of the things within it. So what happens if you start to communicate more effectively? Well, again, what we can say is you will become more productive and your stress levels will reduce. So I'm just going to share with you this strategy, and it's a simple one sentence question which is utterly profound. And it is, who is going to do what, by when, and why? Think about it. Who is going to do what, by when, and why? So again, we can talk about all these tasks, activities, things that you've got on in your diary, what we've just referred to as your bouncing balls. If you've got something there and you're not sure what the answer to that question is in the context of that task, then you're not going to be able to effectively delegate that task, and you won't be sure how to prioritize it. So if somebody asks you to do something for you, you need to extract from them, okay, so you want me to do this task? Yes. When do you need it by, and why do you need it then? And why does it need to be done? And when you get that clarity, you might find out that it's not actually that important for the business. It's a nice to have thing. So you can prioritize it accordingly. Or you could find out when they say what it is and why it's so important, wow, this is business critical, I need to treat this urgently. So the when then becomes a much easier thing to identify. So things, when you're taking these tasks, accepting them, you should know what they are, when they need to be done by, and why. And that way you can effectively prioritize. Now the same thing happens if you're delegating a task to someone else. It's your responsibility to be clear to them, obviously what they're doing, but why it's important, and therefore when it needs to be done by. And I always say to people, if I'm being asked to do something, I try and under-promise and over-deliver. So that's a really critical thing to do, because people don't get disappointed. And try and negotiate a bit of slack time if you can. So if someone says, oh, I need this doing by Wednesday, and you think, well, I'd probably struggle to do it by Friday, can I do it for you by next Monday? So you give yourself a bit of extra time, maybe Tuesday, and at least that way you're not going to promise timescales that you're going to be letting people down on. And again, this is really, really key. So just to summarize this strategy, and some of my clients actually have it written on their screensaver, and it is, who is going to do what, by when, and why. I hope you found these strategies useful, and would love to hear from you if you've got some other strategies that you use that really work well, and if you've got any ideas around the ones that I've shared. Thank you.